Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel. I'm Sixpath Weeb, and I'm glad you're here. Today's fanfic topic explores a fun and creative twist on the Naruto universe. What if Naruto were a girl who loved wearing frocks? We'll reimagine the story and characters from a fresh perspective, adding a light-hearted and original spin to the world we all know and love. Disclaimer: the content on this channel is for entertainment and discussion purposes only. I do not own any of the anime footage used in my videos. All rights and credits belong to their respective creators and copyright holders. Let's jump in and explore this alternate ninja world together. Title: The Frock of the Fox. In the hidden village of Konoha, under skies where the Hokage faces loomed large and proud, lived a girl with sunbright hair and a voice like thunder. Her name was Naruto Uzumaki, and she was unusual. Not just because of the nine-tails fox sealed inside her, not because of the whispered rumors trailing her every step, but because she absolutely loved frocks. Not combat gear, not standard shinobi vests, but full, flowing, colorful frocks. And she wore them unapologetically, sometimes even in training, to Irika's horror. When Naruto first walked into the academy wearing a bright orange sundress, ruffled at the hem, sunflowers stitched at the waist, everyone stared. Some giggled. Some scowled. Sasuke Uchiha, the cool prodigy, narrowed his eyes once and turned back to his book. Sakura laughed behind her hand. But Naruto stood tall. "I'm gonna be Hokage someday," she declared, skirt flaring as she stomped one foot for emphasis, "and I'll do it wearing whatever I want." She wore her frocks like armor. Each stitch was defiance, each ruffle a declaration: "You will not tell me who to be." It hadn't been easy growing up. The villagers already hated her, though she didn't know why. The glances were colder when she wore her dresses. She should dress like a proper girl, some muttered. Others, more cruelly, said she wasn't really a girl, not when she climbed rooftops, punched boys, and charged headlong into trouble. But none of it stopped her. On her 12th birthday, she sewed herself a new dress, navy blue with orange clouds and a wide sash tied into a bow. She wore it to the academy finals. When she got paired with Sasuke in taijutsu sparring, she adjusted her skirt, tightened her boots, and beat him in 3 moves. He glared at her from the mat. "TCH. It's just a dress. Doesn't make you strong." She smirked. "Neither does being a jerk, but here you are." Things shifted after that. Kakashi didn't bat an eye when she showed up for Team 7's first meeting in a mint green dress with reinforced leggings beneath. "Shinobi must see through deception," he said, smiling. "Nice embroidery, by the way." In the land of waves, she fought Zabuza and Haku with the same resolve as her canon self, her dress muddy and torn, but still flowing. Haku, behind his mask, stared at her long. "You fight beautifully," he said, unsure if he meant her fists or her spirit. In her, Haku saw a kindred soul, someone who broke expectations, who dressed how they wished, who wore their heart on their sleeve. But Naruto, full of fire, didn't just bend the rules. She rewrote them. When Jiraiya took her to train, he winced. "Aren't those things a bit impractical?" Naruto rolled her eyes. Says the guy in a giant red robe with wooden clogs. She trained with ferocity. Her dresses grew shorter, tighter at the waist, more suited for combat but no less stylish. Some had kunai loop stitched into the seams. Others had chakra reactive thread. When she finally mastered the Rasengan, she twirled once just for flair before driving it into a boulder. Sasuke's betrayal broke her. Not just because of friendship, but because she'd finally felt seen, even respected, by him. And he'd left. And when she chased him down, her dress was crimson, the color of pain and anger. Torn to shreds in the valley of the end, she stood there barefoot and bleeding, hair loose, skirt soaked with river water, and still refused to stop. "I'll bring you back, even if I have to fight you in a ball gown." The years passed. When she returned to the village after training, older and stronger, she wore a black high-collar dress with mesh sleeves and the Uzumaki swirl embroidered on the back, a warrior's gown. Kiba whistled. Shino said nothing, but nodded once. Sakura teared up. And Sasuke, back from darkness, saw her and froze. She didn't look like the little girl he knew. She looked like a storm that had learned to smile. They sparred again, this time evenly matched. Her kicks were sharper, her chakra more focused. As she stood over him, victorious, she offered him a hand. "I told you I'd bring you back. And I told you I'd be Hokage." He took her hand, and for once, didn't argue. When the war came, She led battalions wearing battle dresses stitched with armor plates, cloaks that rippled like flames, and colors that inspired courage. The Alliance followed her not because she conformed, but because she didn't. She was Naruto, child of prophecy, daughter of Kushina, beacon of the weird and the wild. The day she finally stood at the Hokage monument, newly named the 7th, she wore a formal white frock with golden trim and the kanji for fire emblazoned on the back like a crown. The village roared. She stood there, wind in her hair, dress rippling. "I wore frocks because I liked them," she told the crowd. "I never needed permission to be myself. Neither do any of you." Years later, young ninja would look up at the Hokage monument and see her smiling face. They'd read the stories. Some wore frocks to the academy on their first day. Others wore armor. None of them were laughed at. Because Naruto had worn hers all the way to the top. And changed the world doing it. Naruto, now the 7th Hokage, had more frocks than anyone could count. Each one was unique, just like her, a reflection of her personality, her moods, and her journey. She wore a different frock every day, each of them carefully chosen not just for style, but for the symbolism it carried. And to those who knew her well, it became a matter of curiosity: what would Naruto wear today? The frock collection. She had frocks for every occasion. The casual ones: there was the soft yellow frock with cherry blossoms at the hem, perfect for casual strolls around the village. It was breezy and light, with a ribbon tied around the waist that fluttered in the wind. This one was the one she'd wear on days when she wasn't in her Hokage office and just wanted to be a regular person, walking freely through the streets of Konoha. The training frocks, these were more functional, but still had that distinct Naruto flair. A deep orange, slightly padded with chakra-infused fabric, and flexible enough for her to perform all the spins, kicks, and high-speed maneuvers that defined her combat style. Some of them had little hidden pockets where she kept kunai or explosive tags. A few even had detachable skirts, transforming into a more tactical, combat-ready form. The special occasion frocks, her favorite was the one she wore to her own Hokage inauguration, a long, elegant white frock adorned with golden fire patterns at the hem, the edges sparkling in the sun. The back of the dress had the Uzumaki spiral, a subtle yet intricate embroidery that paid homage to her heritage. She wore this when meeting with foreign dignitaries or attending formal shinobi events. It was a symbol of her leadership, not just in title, but in spirit. The mission frocks, more like tactical tunics, but with a flowy hem and tight at the waist. These frocks were darker in color, usually black or midnight blue, with mesh fabric along the arms for flexibility. Perfect for long missions where she needed the freedom to move, but also for blending in with the night when performing covert operations. The frocks for festivities, the festivals in Konoha were always special to Naruto. On these days, she wore brightly colored dresses, many adorned with motifs of the sun, stars, or fireworks. These dresses were meant to bring joy, to showcase Naruto's vibrant personality and to remind the village of the happiness they all fought for. The frogs of the past, on quiet, personal days, when she was feeling nostalgic, she wore the simple frocks she had worn as a child. A faded orange one, worn thin but comforting, that still carried the echoes of the lonely girl she had been. She kept them tucked away in the deepest part of her closet, pulling them out only when she needed a reminder of how far she'd come. Naruto's legacy. Being Hokage was difficult. There were long hours of paperwork, tense negotiations with other villages, and managing conflicts among the younger generation of shinobi. But Naruto's frocks became her symbol of hope, her armor against the endless pressure. Each frock carried a part of her story. Sometimes, she would stare at the ones in her wardrobe, remembering how they had been with her at some of the most pivotal moments of her life. She often wondered how people would look at her legacy in the future. Would they think of her as the girl in the frock? Or the powerful Hokage who saved the world? But the truth was, she didn't care about how people saw her. She cared about the people she helped. She cared about Konoha. One day, after a long meeting with the other Kage, she returned home, feeling the weight of leadership pressing down on her. She looked at her frock collection, picked the soft yellow one with the cherry blossoms, and slipped it on. The fabric was cool against her skin, and as she twirled in front of the mirror, she smiled. Sometimes, a frock is all you need, she whispered to herself. Life beyond the frocks. The village had changed, as had Naruto. But one thing remained constant: her deep bond with her friends. Sasuke, Sakura, and Kakashi were always by her side, despite the years of war and conflict that had passed. They, too, had their own ways of showing love and loyalty, but no one could deny that Naruto's eccentric sense of style, her frocks, brought light to even the darkest days. Sasuke, the ever-stoic Uchiha, would sometimes tease her about her choice of attire. You know, if you spent more time training and less time picking out dresses, you could become even stronger. But deep down, he had always admired her. Not just for her strength, but for her ability to remain true to herself, no matter what the world threw at her. Sakura, who had once idolized Sasuke and felt overlooked, found herself constantly inspired by Naruto's journey. She had followed in Naruto's footsteps in many ways, from her own fashion choices to her unwavering commitment to protect the village. And Kakashi, who had known Naruto from the very beginning, couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. He had watched her grow from a loud, scrappy girl in orange into the leader of the entire Hidden Leaf village. And though he always maintained his casual indifference, there was one moment that stood out, when he saw her walk into a meeting with other Kage, her frock flowing as she exuded both authority and warmth. He smiled under his mask. She's made it. And she did it on her own terms. The future of the frocks. As the years passed, the younger generation began to see Naruto as more than just a Hokage. They saw her as a symbol of freedom, of individuality, of not being afraid to express oneself. More than a few of them began wearing frocks of their own, some inspired by Naruto's boldness, others simply because they admired her. Konohamaru, now a grown man, and his fellow shinobi often talked about the days when they had first seen Naruto's frocks. They'd laugh about how she had come into the academy with that first ruffled dress, and how it had seemed so out of place in a world of steel and weapons. But as they grew older, they understood. The frocks were never about the fabric. They were about Naruto's heart, fierce, strong, and vibrant. And one day, when the time came for her to pass the torch, Naruto would leave behind a legacy. Not just of strength or leadership, but of individuality. The world would remember the girl who wore frocks. The girl who loved fiercely, laughed loudly, and never once let the world tell her who she should be. Because Naruto Uzumaki wasn't just a Hokage. She was a reminder that anyone could be themselves. Anyone could wear their heart on their sleeve, and perhaps, even wear a frock or two while doing it. Years passed in Konoha, but for Naruto, the journey never truly ended. She had accomplished much, becoming the 7th Hokage and leading the village through times of peace and war. But even as she stood at the top of the village's hierarchy, the frocks she wore never lost their significance. They were not simply garments, they were symbols of her resilience, her individuality, and her refusal to conform to anyone else's expectations. The young ones. As time passed, the village saw new faces, new generations of shinobi. And while they admired Naruto's strength and wisdom, they also admired her spirit. It became a common sight for young ninja, male and female alike, to wear clothes inspired by her style. The shinobi would add their own personal touches, mixing traditional armor with modern fabrics, blending practical training attire with the vibrance that Naruto had brought to the village. The younger generation took to calling her the Frocked Hokage, an affectionate term that had initially been used to mock her, but soon became a symbol of admiration. It was said that no one would ever forget the girl in the yellow dress, or the girl in the orange sundress who had once taken on the world with her heart on her sleeve. Boruto and Himawari's influence. For Naruto's children, Boruto and Himawari, life under the Hokage's roof had its share of quirks. Boruto, often rebellious, couldn't understand his mother's attachment to her frocks. "Why do you always wear those weird dresses, Mom?" he'd ask, scowling at the collection of fabric hanging in her closet. He was a boy who preferred the practicality of pants and jackets, someone who loved fast shinobi techniques over dress-up games. But Himawari, with her soft smile and her love for all things beautiful, had a different perspective. She loved watching her mother twirl around in her dresses, her golden hair fluttering with each spin. Himawari often mimicked her mother, donning soft pastel frocks of her own as she danced around the house. Naruto, seeing this, couldn't help but feel proud. It wasn't the frocks that mattered, it was that her children, too, could see the strength in expressing themselves as they were. And though Boruto often found himself shaking his head at his mother's eccentricity, he knew one thing: Naruto's style and spirit had shaped the world he lived in. His mother wasn't afraid to stand out, and she wasn't afraid to be herself, no matter what anyone thought. That courage, that confidence, was something Boruto couldn't help but respect. "Maybe the frocks aren't that bad," he mumbled to himself one day, as he saw his mother giving a passionate speech in front of the village council. Her frock, a golden one, this time, trimmed with intricate red designs, rippled with her every movement, catching the sunlight in a way that seemed almost magical. Despite the weight of her responsibilities, Naruto's energy radiated with the same enthusiasm and optimism she'd had as a child. A legacy of love. As Naruto grew older, the village continued to thrive, and her legacy became more than just a Hokage's accomplishments. Her frocks, like the love and spirit she'd infused into every step of her journey, began to inspire more than just the younger shinobi. Children, artists, and common folk alike began to look up to her as more than just a leader. She became a symbol of possibility. The Academy held an event one year, the Day of the Frock, in honor of Naruto's unyielding sense of self. It became an annual tradition, where students were encouraged to wear their own renditions of frocks and dresses, blending practical wear with creative flair. No one expected to become a Hokage by simply wearing a dress, but they all knew one thing for certain: Naruto had proven that strength could be drawn from anything, even the simplest of garments. Sasuke and Sakura, too, would occasionally attend these events. Sasuke, always reluctant to embrace public gatherings, stood at the side with a proud but silent air. Sakura, ever enthusiastic, would sometimes even make a rare appearance in her own frock, though hers was less ruffled and more combat-ready than Naruto's. Still, it was a nod to the enduring impact Naruto had on her closest friends. Kakashi, ever the eccentric teacher, would make jokes about how no one could quite measure up to Naruto's boldness, though he, too, had occasionally been seen wearing a scarf that had a subtle Uzumaki swirl, showing his respect for the Hokage who had brought the village to new heights. The frock is the future. As Konoha continued to evolve, the frocks became more than just a fashion statement, they became a movement. A movement of freedom, individuality, and unity all at once. While the shinobi world had once been defined by stoic traditions, bloodlines, and a rigid sense of what it meant to be a ninja, Naruto's legacy challenged that perception. One day, a group of young girls approached Naruto's office. They were dressed in their own versions of her frocks, small renditions that they had sewn themselves, using materials they'd scavenged from around the village. Their eyes were filled with admiration, not just for Naruto's position, but for her unflinching ability to be herself. "We want to be like you, Hokage-sama," one of them said, smiling shyly. "We want to be strong and wear what makes us happy, too." Naruto's heart swelled with emotion. She knelt down to their level, a smile gracing her face. "You don't need to be like me," she said gently. "You just need to be you. That's the most powerful thing you can do." The girls left her office, walking taller than when they'd entered. Their frocks may not have been the same as hers, but they now had something greater: the courage to wear their hearts on their sleeves, too. The frock that changed the world. And so, the world around Naruto continued to evolve. She had long since been more than just the Hokage, she was a symbol, a living testament to the power of individuality. Her frocks, with their bright colors, intricate patterns, and defiant ruffles, had come to represent not just her strength, but the world she had built. The Hidden Leaf Village, once a place of war and strife, was now a place where differences were celebrated, where individuality wasn't just accepted, but encouraged. The power of the frock lived on, woven into the very fabric of Konoha itself. And as Naruto, the frocked Hokage, looked out at the village she had helped create, she knew one thing for certain: the battle was never truly about being the strongest ninja. It was about being true to oneself, finding strength in vulnerability, and having the courage to walk through the world in a dress that spoke of who you truly were. The frocks, she realized, were never about fashion. They were about freedom. And that was the greatest power of all. The Hidden Leaf Village had entered a period of relative peace, but peace, as Naruto knew all too well, was never truly permanent. Beneath the calm, the winds of change were stirring. While the village flourished under her leadership, and the frocks she wore had become a beacon of self-expression, there were whispers in the shadows, secrets waiting to be uncovered. A new threat emerges. It started with the return of an old foe, not one from the distant past, but one from Naruto's own time. It was a figure thought to be long gone, but who had always lingered in the darkest corners of history, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This time, the threat wasn't just physical, it was far more dangerous. It was ideological. The first sign came in the form of a letter, sent directly to the Hokage's office. The handwriting was familiar, yet unsettling. It was a threat wrapped in promises of a new world, a world that rejected the very values Naruto had spent her life defending. The letter read: "The time of the frocks is over. Strength, true strength, comes from control, not chaos. You have worn your heart on your sleeve for too long, but the world demands something stronger. Your time is up, Hokage. The era of individuality ends here." The signature at the bottom of the letter was what truly made Naruto's stomach drop. Danzo Shimura. The name echoed in her mind like a ghost from her past. Danzo had been one of the most ruthless figures in Konoha's history, someone who believed in the strength of control over freedom, power over individuality. He had been a master manipulator, and even though he had died years ago, it seemed his ideology was very much alive. Naruto, usually so bold and unflinching, stood in her office, the letter trembling in her hands. For the first time in years, she felt a deep, gnawing unease. Danzo's shadow had never fully disappeared, and now it seemed his influence was returning in a new form, threatening everything she had built. The disciples of control. Days passed, and strange things began to happen around Konoha. Groups of shinobi started appearing, ones who wore uniforms unlike any Naruto had seen before. They were all black, stark and utilitarian, with red markings that resembled the Sharingan, a symbol not just of power, but of control. These disciples, as they called themselves, were spreading the message of Danzo's revival. Their leader, a figure cloaked in mystery, had begun rallying shinobi to their cause, promising a return to true discipline, where the will of the Hokage was no longer the guiding force. They called themselves the Order of the Unyielding, and they were growing in number, gathering support from within the ranks of the younger generation who were tired of Naruto's chaotic style of leadership. One evening, as Naruto walked through the village in one of her favorite frocks, a soft lavender dress with intricate embroidery of sakura flowers, she was approached by a former ally, a familiar face now cold and distant. Kiba Inuzuka, who had once been one of her closest comrades, stood before her, his eyes hard. He wore the uniform of the order, the same black attire with the crimson markings. Naruto, Kiba began, his voice firm, it's time to face reality. The world can't be governed by feelings and individuality anymore. It needs order. It needs power. Her heart sank. Kiba, who had always been so loyal, had turned against her. His eyes were distant, as though the spark of the old Kiba she knew had been extinguished. No, Naruto replied, her voice shaky but resolute. You're wrong. The world is built on the freedom to choose, to be who you are, to wear what makes you feel strong. She gestured to her frock, though it felt hollow in the face of Kiba's sudden betrayal. I'll never stop believing in that. Kiba's gaze flickered briefly to her dress, and for a moment, she saw something, nostalgia, perhaps, but it was quickly masked by cold determination. The frocks, Naruto, Kiba said, his voice almost sorrowful, are a symbol of weakness. You wear them as if they protect you, but they don't. What protects the village's control? Discipline. Power. He took a step back, his eyes narrowing. We will build a new future, and I will bring you down if I must. Naruto's hand tightened into a fist, her frock swishing as she turned to leave. I won't give up. Not for anything. But as she walked away, the weight of Kiba's words lingered in the air. She knew she was not just fighting for her leadership, she was fighting for the very soul of Konoha. The frocks, the individuality, everything she stood for was under attack. The frocks' true power. It didn't take long for the conflict to escalate. Konoha was divided. Many villagers who had once been content with Naruto's leadership began questioning her decisions, especially as more of the younger shinobi, including some of the most promising ones, joined the ranks of the Order of the Unyielding. They no longer believed in the loose ideals Naruto had championed. They saw her frocks as a distraction, something that symbolized weakness in the face of true power. Naruto, however, wasn't willing to give up. She knew that the Order was a far greater threat than they appeared. They had more influence than just Kiba, they had been gaining followers for years, moving through the shadows, waiting for the right time to strike. But Naruto knew something that they didn't. She knew the true power of the frocks. They weren't just clothes. They were a statement. They were a reminder of who she was and the path she had taken. The frocks were part of her spirit. Her resilience. They were woven with the memories of every battle she had fought, every loss she had endured, and every victory she had achieved. And now, she needed to wear them more than ever. Naruto stood before her mirror in the Hokage office, staring at the frock she had worn when she first became Hokage. The orange one, the one that symbolized everything she had been through, was a beacon of her determination. She pulled it on once more, as if reclaiming her roots. She wasn't just the Hokage anymore. She was a symbol. And it was time to show the world what that really meant. The confrontation. The battle between Konoha's shinobi had begun. Naruto stood at the head of the village, her frock now a battle-ready garment, enchanted with chakra-infused threads that gave her more agility, more speed. The once bright and colorful dress was now marked with scars of past conflicts, but its spirit was stronger than ever. The leader of the order, a tall, imposing figure, appeared before her in the heart of Konoha's streets, surrounded by his disciples. He was wearing a black cloak, the same crimson-red markings that resembled the Sharingan, and his eyes gleamed with an unsettling certainty. "You've failed, Hokage," he said, his voice smooth but cutting. "You, who once believed in the power of individuality, are now powerless. You cannot defeat the order." Naruto stood tall, her frock billowing as the wind swept through the village. "You're wrong," she said. "You don't understand what it means to have a heart full of fire, full of hope. I will fight for the freedom of this village, and I will fight for every single person who believes in it." The leader of the order sneered. "Then let's see if your frock can protect you from true power." The final battle. And so, the fight began. Shinobi clashed in the streets of Konoha, the force of their battles shaking the very ground beneath them. Naruto faced off against the leader of the order, each of them embodying opposite philosophies, one bound by control, the other free to express herself. The frock, torn and battered from battle, fluttered behind her as she unleashed the Rasengan, but not just any Rasengan. This one was infused with everything she had ever fought for, her ideals, her love for Konoha, her refusal to be anything other than herself. In a final, explosive clash, Naruto's Rasengan collided with the leader's dark chakra, sending shockwaves through the village. The earth trembled, and for a moment, it seemed like the entire future of Konoha hung in the balance. The dust settled, and the leader of the order lay defeated. But Naruto's victory came at a cost. As the battle ended, she realized something: the order had done something far worse than simply threaten her, they had sowed seeds of doubt in the hearts of her people. It was no longer just a battle for Konoha's safety. It was a battle for its very soul. The battle with the order had been won, but the victory felt hollow. Konoha was in chaos, its heart divided. The streets that had once echoed with the laughter of children now carried whispers of fear and uncertainty. Naruto, victorious but deeply shaken, stood alone atop the Hokage building, looking out at the village she had spent so many years protecting. The weight of victory. The sun was setting, painting the village in hues of orange and pink, a quiet reminder of the peaceful days she once cherished. But the weight of the conflict loomed large in Naruto's mind. The fight had been hard, but it was the aftermath that would truly test her. She thought of the faces of the shinobi who had once supported her, the young warriors who had chosen to follow the order, believing in Danzo's twisted ideals of power and control. How could she reconcile her leadership with the fact that many of her own people had turned against her, believing the frocks and her ideals to be a weakness? Her frock, the one she wore today, a pale blue one with swirling white patterns, felt heavier than it ever had before. It was still her symbol, but now it felt like an armor that she had to wear for the village's sake, not just for herself. The frock, once a symbol of freedom, was now a reminder of how far she'd come, and how much she still had to fight for. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden presence behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "Naruto," said Sasuke's voice, calm and steady, "you've done it. The battle is over. But I can see what's on your mind." Naruto turned slowly, locking eyes with him. Sasuke had always been her closest confidant, the one person who understood her better than anyone else. He had been with her through every trial, every hardship, and though he wasn't one to show his emotions openly, she could see the concern in his eyes. "I defeated them," Naruto said quietly, her voice tinged with doubt, "but I'm not sure it's enough. The village is split, Sasuke. I feel like I've lost something I can never get back." Sasuke stepped forward, his expression serious. "You didn't lose anything, Naruto. You've only proven the truth of your leadership. The battle may be over, but the real work begins now, rebuilding the trust, the unity, the freedom you stand for. It won't be easy, but I know you. You've always fought for what's right." Naruto looked down at her frock, the fabric swaying gently in the wind. "I wear this because it reminds me of who I am, Sasuke. But what if who I am isn't enough anymore? What if it's my ideals that need to change to protect the village?" Sasuke shook his head. "That's the difference between you and the order. They believe power comes from control. You believe power comes from choice, from trust, from love. That's why you'll never lose." Naruto smiled faintly, grateful for his words. "Thanks, Sasuke. I don't know what I'd do without you." "Then you'll never have to find out," he replied with a rare, soft smile. Rebuilding Konoha. The days that followed the battle were filled with intense reflection and action. Naruto called together the village's leaders, including the elders, council members, and prominent shinobi, to discuss the future of Konoha. The world had changed, and they needed to adapt to the new realities without compromising the core values that made their village strong. But the challenges were more than just logistical. The scars of the Order's rise ran deep, and it wasn't just Konoha's infrastructure that needed rebuilding. It was the people. The shinobi who had once stood by Naruto now looked at her with suspicion. They feared that the ideals of freedom and individuality would weaken Konoha in the long run. They feared that the frocks, once a symbol of her strength, would be the very thing that brought the village to ruin. One morning, after a particularly tense meeting, Naruto found herself walking through the streets of Konoha, trying to find clarity. The villagers, though grateful for her leadership, looked at her with uncertain eyes. Children still wore their frocks, inspired by her, but the adults weren't so sure. The village was questioning itself, its values, and its future. As she walked past the monument of the Hokages, Naruto stopped in front of her father's face, carved into the stone. She reached out and touched the cool stone, thinking of Minato, the man who had given his life for the village, who had been the fourth Hokage. He had been a symbol of strength, too, but the kind of strength that was built on sacrifice, duty, and the willingness to protect those you loved. "What would you have done, Dad?" she whispered softly. "How would you have handled this?" A memory flickered in her mind, one of the times she'd visited her father's memorial as a child, when she had been full of anger and loneliness. She had asked herself why he had left her alone. But now, she understood. He had done it for the village. He had been willing to sacrifice everything for the future of Konoha. And that was a burden she now carried too. But she wasn't her father. She was Naruto Uzumaki, and her strength wasn't in control. It was in choice, in freedom, in the ability to live as who you truly were. She looked down at her frock once more, and for the first time since the battle, she felt a sense of peace. The return of the frocked Hokage. The days turned into weeks, and slowly but surely, the villagers began to heal. The seeds of doubt that the Order had sown began to fade as Naruto made her presence known not just as a leader, but as a person, one who understood the struggles they faced, who had fought for them, and who believed in their ability to move forward. She called for a public event, a celebration of the village's resilience. It was an open invitation for everyone in Konoha to come together, to rebuild, and to reaffirm their commitment to freedom and unity. The day of the event arrived, and Naruto stood before the gathered crowd, wearing her favorite frock, the yellow one, with the cherry blossoms at the hem. It was a simple dress, but it was a symbol of everything she had stood for. She smiled as she took the stage, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. "Today," she said, "we stand together, not just as shinobi, but as people, as a village that believes in the power of freedom, of choice, of individuality. We've faced darkness, but we've also seen the light. And that light comes from each of us, from our strength, from our willingness to be who we are." The crowd was silent, waiting for her next words. The frock isn't just a piece of clothing. It's a reminder that no matter what happens, we have the freedom to choose who we want to be. We don't need to live by someone else's rules. We create our own destiny. Together. And with that, the crowd erupted into applause. A new dawn. The following years saw Konoha flourish like never before. Naruto's frocks, once a symbol of defiance, had become a symbol of hope. The younger generation, inspired by her courage, continued to wear their frocks proudly. They had learned the greatest lesson of all: true power was not found in control or uniformity, but in embracing their differences, in wearing their hearts on their sleeves. Naruto, now more confident than ever, stood at the forefront of this new era. Konoha was a village not just of shinobi, but of people who believed in each other, who believed in the future, and who wore their stories proudly, one frock at a time. The end. As the sun set on the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over Konoha, Naruto stood at the edge of the village, her frock swaying gently in the wind. The world had changed, and so had she. But one thing remained the same: her unwavering belief in the strength of choice, love, and individuality. Through every challenge, every doubt, and every battle, she had never given up on the belief that everyone had the power to shape their own destiny. And as she looked around at the vibrant village that had once again found its peace, she knew that the true heart of Konoha lay in its people, in their courage, in their hearts, and in the freedom to be themselves. Naruto's journey had been one of growth, of learning to embrace both the strength and the vulnerability that made her who she was. And in the end, it was the choice to stay true to herself that had saved her village, and that would continue to guide her as she moved forward. With a soft smile, Naruto whispered to the wind, "I believe in all of us." And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, the village of Konoha stood strong, united, and ready for whatever the future held. A sweet reminder for all of us. True strength is found in the heart. In the courage to be yourself, in the freedom to dream, and in the love we share with those around us. Never forget that you have the power to shape your own path, to wear your own frock, and to live your own story. With love, and always in hope. Naruto Uzumaki. Alright, that's all for today, my awesome YouTube family. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep the journey going. Until next time, stay curious, stay passionate, and always remember, the 6 paths are watching over you. Thank you for being a part of this adventure. Catch you in the next one. 6 Path Weeb.